Hello and welcome to the Banker's June Databank video. I'm David Robinson, the online editor at the Banker, and today we're going to look at sustainable loans and the market share in Europe, which has seen a real surge in demand in the first quarter of this year. With me to discuss this is Marie Kemplay, the investment banking and capital markets editor at the Banker. Marie, let's start with the basics. What is the best way to define a sustainable loan, or should we call it a green loan?
Yeah, that's a good question, David. And I think it's worth dwelling on it because actually people tend to focus quite a lot on sustainable bonds, green bonds, social bonds, all the kind of bonds within that universe, rather than thinking a bit more broadly about what other kind of products there are in the sustainable finance universe. Although the principles with sustainability linked, ESG linked, all these different kind of terms, loans are pretty similar. So for instance, with a green loan, as with a green bond, the capital from that loan needs to be used for funding projects with environmental positive benefits. And with a social loan, similarly, that needs to be, the funding needs to be used to go towards projects with a positive social outcome. So, things like health-related projects or perhaps employability schemes, all these kind of things. And, interestingly, in the last couple of years, we've seen quite an interesting innovation within the sustainable loan markets. So the creation of something called a sustainability-linked loan. And what these are loans where the borrower agrees in advance to a certain number of targets or key performance indicators in relation to environmental goals or social goals or another kind of sustainability linked outcome. And if the borrower doesn't hit those KPIs, if it doesn't meet those targets, it essentially faces a penalty in that it has to pay a higher rate of interest on the loan. So the idea is that the structure of the loan itself is really incentivizing borrowers to meet those targets. And what we've seen actually in the last year is that innovation, that structure has been adopted within the bond markets as well. So there's been the issuance of things called sustainability-linked bonds. And I make the point just to kind of demonstrate that actually isn't always the bond markets that are leading. The loan markets are kind of real innovators as well in this space. And also it's worth emphasizing, although possibly stating the obvious a bit, when we talk around sustainability, sustainable loans, what we're really talking around is the syndicated loan markets. So we're not talking about loans for, ordinary retail consumers or small businesses. We're really talking about the bigger ticket loans to large corporates or other large entities.
So tell me, how has this market been developing in, say, the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say pretty rapidly, actually. The first sustainable loan was actually only issued in 2017. I believe it was led on by Spanish bank BBVA. But in the last 4 years, things have really grown quite a lot. So if we look back to that year in 2017, where really we were only talking about green loans, they accounted for just 0.3% of the market within Europe. If we fast forward to the first quarter of this year, that total is really, that share of the market has increased to 20%. So, 1 in 5 environmental, social, or governance, or ESG as it's often called, linked loans, they now account for 1 in 5 of all the loans that are being originated within Europe. And I think we've touched upon this theme before as well, David, which is the impact the pandemic has had in this space as well, because similar to what we've seen in the bond markets, there has been a lot of social loan issuance happening within the last year or so. So in the first quarter of this year, for example, social loans accounted for 85% of all the ESG linked loans that are being originated within Europe. If we look at overall volumes, so there were actually 57.8 billion euros worth of ESG linked loans originated within Europe in the last quarter of last year. I believe that was the highest total on record, although it has continued to be high this year as well. In the first quarter of this year, it was 46.9 billion euros worth of issuance. And also interestingly, if we combine that with sustainable bond issuance, just to get the real total picture, 184 billion euros worth of both sustainable linked loans and bonds were raised in the first quarter of this year, which is the highest quarterly total on record. So yeah, but a boom time for both of those markets in Europe, certainly.
Well, Marie, you've been focusing on Europe and focusing on loans denominated in euros. Is it just a European trend, or is it more of a global trend? Are there regional hotspots, or are we seeing activity in other parts of the world?
Yeah, you're right to pick me up on that, David, because, as I say, so far all the data we've talked around in this discussion is Europe focused. And yeah, it's very much the case that Europe continues to be a global leader when it comes to sustainable finance, and the loan markets are no exception in that respect. Although there is an expectation that in the coming years, key markets such as the US and Asia are going to take a bigger share, at the moment they are still a kind of minority of that market. So if we look back again to the first quarter of this year, in North America, there was 15.6 billion euros worth of sustainable loans originated. Now, most of that will have been in dollars, obviously, rather than euros, but just for comparison purposes. And if you think back to in Europe, it was 46.9 billion euros worth of issuance. So yeah, less than a third of the European total in North America. And in Asia, it's even smaller at the moment, just 1.05 billion euros worth of issuance in Asia in the first quarter of this year as well. So a lot of room for growth there.
The sustainable loans market looks set to keep becoming more and more important, and it's a trend we will monitor closely on The Banker.